Morning, members. I now call to order the special meeting of the Manpower panel. This is the fourth day of the Chinese New Year. I wish everyone good health, and in the coming year here in this council, we're going to have a good operation. We'll be speaking up for the whole of Hong Kong. We'll be staying united and to triumph over the virus. The pandemic is pretty serious at the moment, and at the request of the administration, we are staying home to battle the pandemic. This may be the first meeting for this Chinese New Year, and we are adopting an online meeting mode, and there are members who are not members of this panel who are attending today's meeting as well. Thank you very much.
So let's go into our agenda proper. And that's actually the reason why we have this special meeting. Because we'd like the administration to complete the scrutiny and passage of the legislation to abolish the offsetting arrangement under the MPF system ASAP. So the item is proposed abolition of the offsetting arrangement under the MPF system. All members of the council have been invited to join this part of the meeting. The administration has prepared paper CB 239/2022 bracket 1 for members' information. We give the floor to the Secretary for Labour and Welfare, Dr. Lo Chi Kwong, to give us a briefing on paper CB 239/2022 bracket 1. When members who wish to speak on this item use the virtual hand on Zoom to indicate. You may now use the hand now. And members who would like to speak, please note that there is a timer on the mon. So for this item, each member can have 4 minutes, up to 4 minutes for questions and answers. Dr. Law. Thank you, Chairman. Good morning. First, a very happy Chinese New Year to all members of the panel, and may I wish you a very successful Year of the Tiger. So this item is on proposed abolition of the offsetting arrangement under the MPF fund scheme. On the 4th of January 2022, the Sitting Council approved that the Employment and Retirement Schemes Legislation Offsetting Arrangement Amendment Bill 2022 be introduced into the Council. Since this is the start of the term, before we submit the bill, we have to consult members on the legislative proposals. The community, in fact the Labour sector in particular, has been asking for abolition of the offsetting arrangement for a long time. It's just that views are diverse on the actual arrangements. So this term of government has worked very hard, making various proposals, hoping that we can abolish the arrangements ASP. After many rounds of consultation and also adjustment to our proposals, in 2019, the CE announced in a policy address an enhanced package for abolishing the arrangement that includes how to give effect to the abolition, introducing a designated savings account DSA scheme to assist employers to save up for after the abolition to meet their future liabilities, and also a government subsidy scheme. So in a minute, I'm going to give the floor to the Commissioner for Labour to brief you on our legislative proposals. Our plan is to introduce the bill to the Council on the 23rd of February. So after the Financial Secretary delivered his budget speech, may I invite members to stay for a little bit longer to hear the first reading of the bill. And it was announced in 2001 policy address that the government's enhanced package be further enhanced. The subsidy will last for about 25 years, and we will focus on our support for the micro and SMEs. The proposal has been well received by the community. As for the DSA scheme, we are now consulting stakeholders on the details. And of course, we will consult the panel in due course. We hope that the legislation to implement the DSA scheme can be presented to the Council in the first half of the year. While the two are related, but they can be dealt with in two separate legislative exercises. So we would first want to sort out the principal ordinance and also the principles for the abolition arrangement. And then we would like to have your support. In this regard, I will first invite the Commissioner to brief you on details of the legislation. Thank you. Chair, we will have our PowerPoint presentation to brief members on the main proposals in the bill. Now, we will have to amend 8 principal legislation or subsidiary legislation. Now, this is forward-looking arrangement. That means there is no grandfathering arrangement. So upon passage of the bill in the Council, and the commencement date will be designated by the Secretary by means of subsidiary legislation, and we call that the transition date. That is a material date, and then we will have to wait until the EMPF platform is commissioned before the new arrangement or the abolition arrangement can commence. Now, there will be 2 scenarios. Now, if an employee is employed after the transition date, and if he has to be paid severance pay or long service payment, this flow chart shows you the arrangement in the future. Under the current legislation, there can be 3 portions for offsetting. First is the mandatory contributions, i.e. 5% from the employer under the MPF system. And the second part is the voluntary contribution part, and that's the second part. And the third is end of contract gratuity. So 3 types of benefits can be used for offsetting. After the new legislation is enacted, then the first part cannot be used for offsetting, but then the second and third part, i.e. voluntary contribution from employers and end of contract gratuities, can still be used for offsetting. It's shown very clearly on this plan. Now, this is for the arrangement for post-transition employment. So you see how I cross out the first type of benefit. Mandatory contributions from the employer cannot be used for offsetting. Not so for gratuities and voluntary contributions. The proposed legislation will have no effect on the calculation of SP and LSP, i.e. the calculation of SP and LSP entitlement will remain the same. Now, the maximum salary is capped at 22,500 monthly, and for every full year of service, the employee is entitled to 2/3 of that highest monthly salary, and the last the salary of the last month of employment will be used, and then the total SP or SP entitlement is capped at $390,000. Here's an illustration. Assuming that we have an employee employed after the transition date and the monthly salary of his last month of service is $18,000. For every full year of service, he is entitled to 2/3 of that monthly salary, assuming that he has served for 7 years. So for every full year, he has got $12,000 of entitlement, and since he has served for 7 years, then he is entitled to $84,000. Assuming that for the mandatory contribution from the employer at that date is $75,600. So he will receive $84,000 of SP or SP plus $75,600, and in total he will have $159,600. Another more complicated situation is we believe that many employees would have already been employed before the transition date, and then he may be entitled to SP or SP after the transition date. On the left-hand side, we have the current situation. The transition date is marked red, and then on the right-hand side, we have the post-transition arrangement. So there is no grandfathering for the pre-transition employment. That is, the employer can still use mandatory contributions for offsetting, but post-transition, for the post-transition period, the employer can no longer use the mandatory contributions for offsetting the SP or LSP. So next page, we have the technical arrangements. First, the transition date was marked red. So to calculate the SP or LSP pre-transition, then the monthly salary for calculating the entitlement is not the current salary. Rather, is the last monthly salary pre-transition. So because the monthly salary pre and post transition may be different, and so for the first part we use the monthly salary pre-transition for calculation. And the second part is the employer can use the mandatory contributions for paying SP or LSP pre-transition. And even the mandatory contributions paid after transition can be used for offsetting. So, another chart. Under the current legislation, 3 types of money can be used for offsetting. First, mandatory contributions from the employer. Second, voluntary contribution from the employers, if any. And third, gratuities. The brown part, that is the pre-transition period. All 3 parts can still be used for offsetting. But post-transition, that's the situation on the right-hand side in gray. The employer can only use voluntary contributions or gratuities for offsetting. The employer cannot use mandatory contributions to offset entitlement post-transition. So, for calculation of SP or LSP, for the entitlement pre-transition, the monthly salary The last monthly salary pre-transition is used for the basis of calculation, and then after transition, the last month's salary of the employee after transition will be used for the calculation.
Under the ordinance, the maximum payment of SP or LSP is $390,000. So for the pre and post transition entitlements, if it goes beyond 390,000, how are we going to deal with it? If it is more than $390,000, then this will be deducted from the post-transition amount. If the total SP and LSP is, it will be $410,000, then the brown portion, the $200,000, and the gray portion is supposed to be $210,000. Now the extra $20,000 will be deducted using the post-transition portion, meaning $190,000. Let me cite you an example. Let's say pre-transition under the existing arrangement, the last month's pay is $15,000. As I said earlier, with each year there will be SP-LSP of two-thirds of the pay. Let's say he's been there for 4 years, altogether for $40,000. Post-transition, upon dismissal, let's say the last month's pay is $18,000. With each year, he gets two-thirds of SP and LSP, assuming that he's been there for 3 years. He will be $12,000 times 3, or $36,000. So the total SP LSP is $40,000 plus $36,000 equals to $76,000. But as I said, under the law, the SP LSP pre-transition, the contributions can be offsettable. Let's say the mandatory contribution on the part of the employer accumulates to $68,400. This can be offsettable, and the remainder is $28,400. Now, with this remainder, we can work out the day on which dismissal takes place, how much the employer will get, and that's the $76,000. As a result of the offsetting of the pre-transition entitlements at $28,400, altogether the employee would be entitled to $104,400. That's the whole calculation of the entitlements. Most of the employees in Hong Kong are under the MPF system, but there are some who are part of the ORSO scheme, or if they are working as a teacher, they do have the Provident Fund. And there are also some overseas employees who are working in Hong Kong who have already taken part in the superannuation scheme, and they should all be given equal treatment in the context of the abolition of the offsetting arrangement. So for these schemes, there is no differentiation between voluntary or mandatory contribution, but we do have a formula to work out how much the mandatory contribution will be. And there is a formula that can be used, and that's the final month's pay times 5%. Times number of years of service times 12. That will give us the offsettable amount. So as a result of the abolition of the offsetting arrangement, this amount will become the non-offsettable amount. After deducting these non-offsettable benefits, if there are any benefits outstanding, it would be more like the voluntary contribution under the MPF. Now, this amount can be used for offsetting. Now, from this diagram, it would be like this. It would be very similar to the MPF arrangement. Other than the offsetting arrangement, there are also a number of technical amendments to the Ordinance. Under the new arrangement, the SP or LSP payable will not be subject to salaries tax. We'd like to put this beyond doubt. The employees' arrangement will remain unchanged. Like the foreign domestic helpers, they will not be affected by this arrangement at all because they're not subject to the MPF system in the first place. Also, we'd like to take this opportunity to make some amendments to the PWIF ordinance. First, under the PWIF, if an employee is granted ex gratia payment, then there will be an arrangement under the law. The PWIF board will be chasing the amount from the employers. With the abolition of the arrangement under the law, we will make it very clear that in spite of the subrogation right, the PWIF board cannot chase the mandatory contributions. And there is also a favorable arrangement. Now, if there is a wage reduction, prior to the wage reduction, there is an agreement that for SP and LSP payable, it would be based on the higher wages. So the ex gratia payment will be based on the higher wages. So if we do not make any technical amendments, then the SP will not be based on the higher wages. So if we are basing on the pre-transition wage level, just in the unlikely event that he suffered from a pay cut, then we'll go back to the higher wages pre-transition. As the Secretary said a moment ago, there are three main parts to this abolition arrangement. The key thing is the legislative amendments. Other than that, there are two more things. First, we have made the announcement to the public that there is going to be a refined subsidy scheme, and this is to enable the employers to get adjusted to the transitional period. Also, the Secretary mentioned the DSA, the designated savings account. I'm going to brief you further on this subsidy scheme. Now, in our contact with employers, they are asking for two things. Number one, they want certainty with the abolition of the offsetting arrangement. How much out-of-pocket expenditure do they expect? Second, for the small and medium-sized enterprises that are not financially robust compared with the large corporations. So this table shows you the refined subsidy scheme. As you can see from this table, for the first 9 years, if the SP and LSP does not exceed $500,000, then there will be a cap put on it for the first 3 years. With each dismissal, the maximum amount would be as much as $3,000. For the first 3 years, now we're looking forward. We're not imposing any retrospective effect. Now for the third year, the number of years covered will be only 3 years. Now let's say dismissal of 3 workers take place, then the maximum amount will be $3,000 times 3. But in 9th year, the cap will be progressively increased from $3,000 to $25,000 to $50,000. By the 10th year, there will be a proportional arrangement accordingly. That's the proportion shared by the administration, by the employers. Now, the beauty of this is that the MSCMs will, for the first 9 years, will face a certainty as to how much they're going to be shelling out in the event of dismissal. If we use 2021 basis, the government's expenditure is going to be $33.2 billion. Let's go back to the previous PowerPoint. If you are discerning enough, I mentioned the transition date and the calculation of the SP applied to the removal of the offsetting arrangement. The SP and LSP is based on the last month before the transition. Now, because we don't have any retrospective effect, and that we can, and there is a cutoff point for calculating the SP and LSP. If you're discerning enough, there is a likelihood that the SP and LSP entitlements, even if you add on the employers' MPF contribution that is not offsettable, let's say this $104,000 case. Now, if in 1 or 2 years' time there is a pay rise, then the total entitlements may suffer as a result of the abolition of the offsetting arrangement. Now, let's say after the cutoff point there is a dramatic pay rise, then the employee will suffer in terms of the SP and LSP entitlements. In our paper to be submitted to the council for these cases, if the employees were to be worse off than they would otherwise be entitled to in terms of aggregate benefits, the government will make up the shortfall to make sure that the aggregate benefits will not suffer as a result of the arrangement. Thank you, Chairman. Thanks very much, Secretary. There is a reminder for members on the technical side. Please turn on your Zoom camera. And second, please use the color background provided by the Secretariat. Orange for the EC, and for the FC, green. And for GC members, please use purple as the background color. So please make sure you've got the right color. Now, we have a list of members who are going to be putting questions. Bill Tang, Kingsley Wong, Kwok Wai Kung, Zhou Xucheng, Leung Chi Wing, Li Lin Kwok, Aman Yu, and Horace Zhang.
Mr. Tang Capio, 4 minutes. Thank you, Chair. Am I coming through? Sure. Thank you, Chair. And I'd like to take this opportunity to wish all members and also the administration, the Secretariat, a very successful and happy Chinese New Year. With regard to the offsetting arrangement, for members who were not party to the negotiations, perhaps you might find it a bit difficult to understand, but I've been in the labor sector for a long time, and I am also a member of the Labor Advisory Board and also non-executive member of the MPFA. Now, this is a very complicated system involving dismissal and years of service, and therefore this very complicated situation warrants a complicated solution. Since 2012, it's been 11 years I have taken part in the whole process. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the Secretary in spending a lot of efforts in designing this arrangement. I understand even before he became the Secretary, he had been making a lot of concrete proposals to the system. So I'm a fair person. I want to thank him for his efforts. However, this is a rather complicated issue. And I'd like to know whether the administration is prepared to explain the arrangement to most members here so that they can gradually get to understand the system. This is a rather challenging task. I'd like to know whether the administration has the will to do it. And then I'd like to give you my opinion as well. Using this transition date as the data for different arrangements. Now, if employers dismiss all the employees prior to the transition date, they will lose out unless they don't want to continue their business. So they may end up paying more LSP or SP if they do so. So I'd like to ask whether the Secretary agrees with my opinion. Secretary, thank you. Mr. Tang for giving me this opportunity to clarify this. Yes, the bill may look simple, is to abolish the offsetting arrangement. When it comes to calculation, now, if you have no idea as to how SP and LSP entitlements are calculated, then this is quite a challenging piece of legislation. So prior to introducing the bill to the Council, we will do our very best to approach members. And we've already started this exercise, but it takes time to reach all 90 members. Now it's important to brief the hundreds of thousands of employers in Hong Kong. Now, our worry is, no matter how hard we have tried to help employees and employers, when they don't understand the legislation, they may do something rather illogical. So it is important that we explain clearly to employers and employees, because the total amount of LSP will still remain $390,000. If an employer sacks an employee prior to the transition date and employs another one, and then the part that cannot be offsetted will still be 390,000. So pre-transition, an employee may get 100,000 or 200,000. Post-establishment, he can only at most get 100,000. If he is sacked instead, then his entitlement will become 390,000. The employer doesn't get anything extra. So the design is to ensure employers understand that if they dismiss their employees, then they will lose out. But I think we have to explain very clearly, otherwise the message may still be incomplete, and employers may still decide to dismiss all the employees. That would be misleading, and both employers and employees will lose out. Mr. Wong Kok Yi. Thank you. I'd like to wish everyone good health and a very successful new year. The MPF system is like a preterm baby. The legislation was endorsed before 1997, and so the legislation was not well thought out, and there are a lot of loopholes, and the labor sector has been spent more than 20 years trying to plug the loophole. And it's close to 10 years since the administration proposed the abolition of the arrangement, and the accrued benefits have grown to $57.6 billion. While the labor sector is not very happy with the current proposal, but if we store our feet longer, if we drag our feet longer, then the loss would grow. So I hope the establishment of the EMPF can be completed as planned, so that by 2025 we can have the scheme fully implemented. So, Secretary, can you promise that the arrangement will be put in place as planned, so that employees will not continue to suffer? And you should also encourage employers to improve labor benefits. After the law is enacted, can the administration take the lead to implement the new arrangements to non-civil service contract workers of the government, so that the government can set a good example for all employers in Hong Kong? The government would not stall for sure. We will do our utmost to ensure that the preparation work is put in place, in particular the EMPF platform, because it's related to the establishment of DSA scheme. We have a very tight timetable. We'll do our utmost to ensure that the EMPF system can start to be up and running in 2024 and be fully commissioned in 2025. We will do our level best to ensure this. And then I cannot answer on behalf of the administration with regard to the second question, because we haven't had any discussion within the government yet. In particular, whether once the legislation is passed, the government itself can abolish the offsetting arrangements as soon as possible, because we have operational and financial issues to be explored. So, but then we note this opinion. As in the introduction of 14 weeks of maternity leave a few years ago, the government implemented that even before it was mandatory. Still, this matter requires a thorough discussion, so I cannot make any undertaking today. Mr. Kwok Wai-keung. Thank you, Chair. My point is similar to Mr. Wong Kok. We understand that we have been talking about abolition of the arrangement for many years, and we all hope that it can be implemented as soon as possible, because I think when it comes to labor welfare or benefits, the abolition of the offsetting arrangement will have the widest range of implications. because for instance, extension of the maternity leave entitlement is not the coverage is not as wide as this one. So we want the arrangement to be abolished ASAP so that we can have a pillar for retirement for our employees. Now we will see this term of government coming to an end soon, and we will have a new term of government. So I'd like to know whether they can really adhere to the timetable to ensure that by 2025 everything can be implemented. I'd like to ask the administration whether it is 100% confident that this can be done. And after the abolition arrangement, I'd like to ask the administration whether it has assessed the sectors that will use this arrangement most. For instance, those who employ employees on a contract basis. The labor sector has always advocated avocation of the outsourcing arrangement because it exploits employees, and our frontline employees have suffered a lot because of the offsetting arrangement. Thank you. In just like my reply to Mr. Wong Kwok's question, we need the eMPF system to support us. We will do our very best, but honestly speaking, we cannot give any undertaking because in developing a new system, a lot of factors are at play. But from the government's point of view, this eMPF platform is mission critical. So the FSNTB and the Labor and Welfare Bureau will fully monitor the development of the e-platform. And then we also have a lot of supporting facilities and public education and publicity. We will ensure that the majority of employers in Hong Kong understand the new arrangement, and there are other support required. For instance, how we can help the financial management of micro and SMEs. So a lot of work is required, and we will for sure do this. And the other part of the question is, we will explore how the government can also do this. In our outsourcing system, we have done a lot to enhance the system to ensure that our grassroots workers, the non-skilled workers in particular, can be protected. Another work that is related to the eMPF platform is the government paying the employees' contribution on their behalf, because the minimum contribution is $12,100, and the workers earning less than this level is not required to pay any contribution, but we have to ensure that they get their share of retirement protection as well. So we must set up the eMPF platform as soon as possible, and the government should help grassroots workers to secure a better retirement protection in the long term. The government has proposed a government reorganization plan and the Labor and Welfare Bureau's responsibility in this regard will be heavier, in particular in terms of policy coordination.
Mr. Zhao Xichong, Chairman, Secretary, Happy New Year. Chairman, this subject of abolition of the offsetting arrangement achieved a consensus during the last term. Back in 2012, discussion already started. It's been a decade now. Towards the end of the last term, there were some proposals put forward. And in this term of administration, at the beginning of the term, there are some pretty progressive measures that are proposed to help the employers to get adjusted to the transition. But things have been dragging on year after year after year until today, and we still haven't seen this on the floor of the Council. Chairman, in terms of the abolition of offsetting, the labor sector has made tremendous concessions. We don't really mind the administration rolling out more measures to assist the MSEMs to tide them over this transitional period. I'd like to see this bill enacted as soon as possible to benefit the working population. Now, Para 24 says that we plan to introduce, it is expected to be fully implemented in 2025 at the earliest. Is there a typo? Expected to be fully implemented in 2025 at the earliest. Well, why don't you tell us when you're going to see this through at the latest? My first question is, why do we have to wait until 2025? Why do we have to wait until the EMPF platform is commissioned? Can't the government shorten the time frame as much as possible? Now, will you tell us how soon you're going to get this implemented at the latest? Second, this is a major labor policy. How can you predicate this on the commissioning of the MPF platform? My question for the Secretary is this. In the unlikely event that the MPF platform were to experience some problems and cannot be commissioned in 2022, what contingency do you have if the MPF doesn't come about until 2030? What are you going to do? And this is wholly unreasonable. I think the Secretary should designate a specific time frame. And if you have to rely on the platform, then I think we have to work back from the commissioning date of the platform. Secretary, thanks very much for Mr. Chow's question. And I'm glad that I have the opportunity to elaborate on this. If I recollect, it was on the 26th of October 2015 that we started the discussion, and in June, end of June 2017, the abolition proposal or preliminary proposals were put forward. And in mid-2015, there was a detailed proposal that was put forward for discussion in the community and started the whole process of consultation. I think we have to bear in mind that this is no easy task at all. In the policy address in 2018, we put forward the final model, but as you're aware, the legislative amendments are really copious. The Commissioner spent a pretty short time covering the whole process, but in fact, this is very complicated. We have to make sure that everything is done all right, and we have to make sure that in the legislative amendment exercise, we cannot really afford to have any error. When it comes to implementation, we're not sure whether there will be any problems that we cannot anticipate today. Like the competition ordinance, we saw this kind of situation happening, so we have to make sure that we will use our best endeavor to deal with a piece of legislation that is terribly complicated. Why do we have to wait for the eMPF platform? Simply put, without the eMPF platform, the Labor Department will have to set up a system similar to the eMPF before we can achieve the abolition of the offsetting arrangement. Why do we have to ask the Labor Department to do so? As you all understand, 40% of the contribution or MPF contribution is handled manually. So we're talking about 3 million workers. We have to take a snapshot when the legislation is in place. Now, the snapshot will show the accumulated SPs and LSPs accumulated. Now, this is something that cannot be done manually. We have to have the e-platform to do it. If we have to spend billions and billions of dollars to handle this system, then it will be it will not be a good idea. Now, we're involved in the formulation of the eMPF platform. We have to make sure that the platform will be coming on stream. Now, we're talking about 300,000 employers or 3 million or so employees. This is a digital platform that is non-existent in Hong Kong now. And there is a lot of digitization work that has to be done. Like what I said, 40% of the contributions are handled manually, and we have to handle this in a digital manner. But because of the consumption voucher scheme, a lot more people are embracing digitization, but nowhere near the level that we like. Now, we will not be dragging on the matter for sure. So please do not say that we're dragging on the matter at all. We don't have any intention to drag the matter in any way. There are 8 members, or 9, myself included, and time is pretty tight. Members who are interested to take the floor, please raise their hands. We're going to be drawing a line soon. Mr. Lam Chen Sing. Chairman, thank you. And thanks very much for the presentation. I am more concerned about paragraph 14 of the paper, and that is the scenario in which the employees will be worse off after the abolition than what they would be entitled to under the current offsetting regime, i.e. the total amount of entitlement is smaller than that under the existing regime. Will this be clearly spelled out in the legislation? Now, if this scenario arises, will the employee be showing you this paragraph to show that the Secretary has already given the undertaking and the Labor Department will be reimbursing them the differential? After the transition, if there is a dramatic pay rise and he get dismissed, then this scenario might arise. Now, as the Secretary said, this may be a rare situation, but I hope that the Labor Department will keep the employees in the dark about this. If they don't speak up, they're not going to get the entitlement, and this should not be happening. And I hope that you will be publicizing this arrangement so that the employees would understand their own entitlements. Second, the whole thing is very complicated. You will be subsidizing the MSEMs, and it's terribly complicated, but I think that it's a step in the right direction. You're going to have the progressive subsidy scheme. If dismissal takes place this year or next year, then it doesn't make any particular difference, and there will not be any incentive for the employers to get rid of the staff. So since this is so complicated, will there be any software in the program like the tax payable? If you key in your pay, you have some ideas how much you're going to be taxed. Would there be such software becoming available for them to understand the whole thing better? Also, the DSA. My understanding is that the DSA is for the employers to meet the SP-LSP liabilities. If the business is folded, would the assets be belonging to the employers, or would the assets there have to be used for meeting the SP-LSP liabilities? Secretary. Right. In terms of the SPL and LSPs before and after the transition, and if the employees were to be worse off than what they would be entitled under the current regime, this will be covered by the government policy, and this will become the legislative intent, and this will not only be the undertaking of this term of administration, that this will be an undertaking for the administration going forward. You mentioned helping the employers and employees to understand the whole thing. Now, on the web, you see a lot of calculators. We're contemplating something like this. And through the eMPF platform, we are contemplating some software to enable the relevant parties to work out their entitlements and also their payments. And with the enactment of the legislation, we will be making preparation for that. As to the DSA, when the bill is coming through, we'll be going into further detail about that. Now, for this DSA, it is there for the employers to meet the SP-LSP liabilities. If a business becomes insolvent, what is going to happen to the sum in the designated savings account? That we will be going into further detail about this. We don't have to go into further detail today, but this is an important issue. Definitely, we will be taking up with members the government's proposal in this regard. Right, please, members, make it brief. When you put questions, for the Secretary to have sufficient time to address your questions. Mr. Leung Chi-wing, Chairman. In the paper, the SP and LSP, the maximum ceiling is $22,500, and maximum payment is $390,000. Now, the government is helping or subsidizing the employers for 25 years. The employment ordinance has been unamended for many years. In future, if there are any changes to the ordinance, will there be any corresponding changes regarding these two amounts? Will there be further clarification there? Second, the Secretary said that this will be coming about in 2025 at the earliest. I don't think is a good idea to pitch it at 2025, and we have to wait for the eMPF platform. Now, my concern is that we're not sure whether the eMPF platform will become available in 2025. And second, why do we have to make a link with the eMPF platform in this abolition exercise? I'm not sure whether you have consulted the trade, and now we would expect that by the time you enact the legislation, you should have a timetable for this to be implemented. I don't mind a delay of 1 year or so for publicity and education, but if there is any further delays, then it wouldn't be good for the employees.
Another question is, the Secretary said that the system will have to be able to calculate it automatically. In fact, all trustees are already doing that. And for monthly contributions and also procurement of funds, they are already doing that. So will you require all trustees to take a snapshot of the current situation? So why do you have to wait until the eMPF system is up and running? I hope the implementation I hope that the transition date can be unpacked from the commissioning of the eMPF platform. Now, if we don't use the eMPF platform, then the Labor Department will have to set up another platform exactly the same as the eMPF platform to deal with the abolition arrangement. Then it will have cost implications, and we may have to apply for $2 billion to set up the platform, and the commissioning date may even be later than the eMPF platform, and that is not what you want to see. So we may as well cooperate with the FSTB. I hope they can set up the eMPF platform successfully, and I won't repeat the reasoning. I hope that the labor sector in particular, now if all of a sudden you want to adjust the ceiling of $390,000, then you will have to start from square one again. I hope we don't have to deal with this in the near future. In late 2017, the last term of government once wanted to lower the ceiling of $390,000. So I am using 1/2 or 2/3 of the monthly salary. The last term of government, as a compromise, wanted to lower the ceiling of the payment. Now, if you want to raise the ceiling, I really have no confidence in completing the work within this term. So, members, please bear this in mind. Ms. Kwok Lei-ling. Thank you, Chair. We have been arguing about this abolition arrangement for many years, and many employees would like the arrangement to be put in place as soon as possible. So can you please give us a clear transition date for the benefit of employees? The enhanced package is much similar than the previous two packages. And I think it's also more acceptable to most micro and SMEs. And but then they are also quite worried because a micro enterprise may only employ 2 to 3 employees, and they are concerned about the administrative and paperwork involved, because they already find the MPF-related documents very complicated. With this new system, there will be a DSA scheme, and usually there will be teething problems. So has the administration bear this in mind, and how will you help micro SMEs in this regard? And how will you help them during the transitional period so that the employers will not inadvertently break the law because of the paperwork involved. And the ceiling of payment is $390,000, and what is the point of having this ceiling? And if there is an excess of $20,000, $30,000, or $40,000, will the benefits go to employees? And will this ceiling gradually lose out to inflation? The timetable is for the bill to receive its first reading on the 23rd of February. We hope that with members' cooperation, we can complete the legislative work within this this term of government. We need the platform to deal with the 3 million odd employers and employees accounts, and for all employers, including those running micro and SMEs. We want to use one interface for the DSA scheme, so no two systems are involved. If, as suggested by some members, we set up our own system for the DSA, then there may need to be an interface between the two systems. And that again explains why we have to wait for the eMPF's platform. About 40% of the employers are already dealing with MPF accounts electronically. We believe that we will do a lot of promotion and publicity to ensure that employers use the eMPF platform that will facilitate the operation of the DSA scheme as well. So we believe that for a long time to come, we are going to organize workshops for employers to help them understand the system. Now, since the establishment of SP and LSP system, there has been a ceiling to let employers know their maximum undertaking or commitment. If we have an SP or LSP system with no maximum payment, then I believe the financial risks will be substantially higher, and it's also rather difficult for most employers to shoulder. So if now the calculation is 2/3 of $22,500, then and to multiply by the years of service, I think it will be quite a long time before the ceiling can be reached. And I think the ceiling is about right. A fresh discussion will complicate matters, and it will be another round of wrangling between employers and employees. Thank you. Am I coming through? Yes. Thank you very much, Secretary and your team, for explaining in great details the proposed system. The abolition proposal has gone through a long period of discussion. Since 2018, there was the announcement of the abolition arrangement, and we have seen 3 years of discussions, and we understand that in 2022 there will be an enhanced package. I think for the majority of the employers and employees, all they get is the abolition of the offsetting arrangement. For the more complicated details, such as the enhanced arrangement and the setting up of DSAs, I think it's not very. Most members of the public are not very familiar, and even legislators take time to digest the details. given that this is such an important policy, will you take this opportunity of the legislative exercise to enhance public education and publicity to let employers and employees understand the arrangements and acquire the necessary knowledge to allay their concerns, because many enterprises are operating in a very dire situation. I believe we did not have sufficient understanding of the 2018 enhanced package. If as a result of misunderstanding, we have misunderstanding or about the scheme, then it is not good administration. So, Secretary, will you plan to publicize more and provide more support for implementation of the new scheme? Secretary, thank you. I'm sure all legislators will urge us to do a better job. In the coming months, we will provide briefings to employers, because misunderstanding or lack of knowledge may give rise to fear and panic. So, to make the new arrangement more acceptable to employers, I'm sure briefings are needed. I hope the pandemic can ease very soon, so that we can go to employers to explain. Of course, explanation and writing is good, but face-to-face interaction is even better. And if the industry would like us to give briefings, we will be more than happy to do that. Mr. Horace Chung. Chairman, thank you very much. I think it's an inevitable trend that we abolish the offsetting arrangement. Since the package was first announced in 2018, we have seen a few rounds of adjustments to address views from the community and to make the arrangement better. And there have been adjustments in response to the concerns of micro and SMEs. So I'd just like to follow up on some of the refined proposals. As indicated by the administration previously, some employees may be worse off after the new arrangement. For instance, those who have seen a substantial wage rise after the transition, but because of the cutoff date, the calculation of pre-transition period will be based on a lower salary, and then the post-transition employment period may be shorter than the pre-period as well. This may reduce the acceptability of the scheme to employees. And I understand that the government will provide a subsidy scheme to help employees. So when it comes to administrative measures to make up for the shortfall, how are you going to do that? And are you confident that these administrative measures can really help employees affected to ensure that they will not be worse off when it comes to their entitlements? Secretary, to answer your question, simply we must help or enable employees to do their own calculations. If after their own calculation they found themselves worse off, then they can come forward to apply for subsidy. Because That's exactly why the EMPF system is so important to the government. Now, if the information is correct, and with our central platform to do the calculation is going to be quite complicated. The MPF platform is vital to our successful implementation of the new system. And I'm sure the platform will be able to help employees to do their own calculation as well. But there are also technical issues to address, because the accrued benefits of employers' contributions has a market value and is time sensitive. For instance, the stock market today may be different from what it will be on Monday, and that will have a bearing on the benefits employees can enjoy. We would try to help the administration to have a cutoff date, and then the government will fork out the subsidy accordingly. And we need time to explore this, and that's why after the law is enacted, we will have to implement the supporting measures.
Ms. Carmen Khan. Chairman, thank you. I've got two suggestions for the department and the Bureau. Am I coming through? Yes. Thank you. I saw the PowerPoint presentation, and it was about the practical operation of the scheme. Now, when you explain the details to the stakeholders, I think you have to make sure that both the employers and employees would understand the operational details. Now, you said that post-transition, for those with long years of service, the offsetting portion would be rather large. I think you should have explained this clearer in the PowerPoint presentation, because this is to avoid a situation where there is a wave of dismissals. And I hope that for new recruits, the maximum payment is $390,000, and I think you have to explain this more clearly. Second, a lot of stakeholders don't quite understand why we have to wait for the EMPF platform. Now, what sort of role is the platform playing? I hope that the administration will tell us in no uncertain terms, why do we have to wait for that? What is the role there? Perhaps you might wish to weave that into the presentation in greater detail. Also, other members refer to the DSA and the designated savings account. We don't have any finalized details yet. Now, in paper 24, paragraph 24 of the paper, in the second quarter of 2022, the administration will introduce the bill for the DSA scheme into the council. Now, is it concurrent with the 8 pieces of amendment bills? When you present the 8 bills to the council, if it is not concurrent with this designated savings account bill, then we're not dealing with the whole thing in a whole single package, and this is not sufficiently clear. If they're not done simultaneously, what considerations do you have? Now, what about the DSA amount? Will there be any trustees arrangement? Should there be any problems with the employers? Who's going to be owning the amount? Right. We certainly will consider this. As we said earlier, there are three elements. The first one is the administration will be helping the employers to deal with the transitional arrangements. Second, the legislative amendments. Third, we will help the employers to deal with their cash flow in the form of a DSA. The third one is related, but this can be separated in our design. The subsidy will not be written into the law, and we will go to the Finance Committee for the funding to be approved. That's a separate exercise altogether. For the DSA, it is there to assist the employers to deal with the contingent liabilities. If these were to arise, they're going to have enough cash to deal with the liabilities. Because otherwise, if they don't have enough cash to meet the SP and LSP liabilities, there will be problems. So with the abolition of the offsetting arrangement, this is going to be the package that we will put in place. That we will certainly help the employers and also to help the employees to keep their jobs. And we did consider whether we should have one single omnibus bill together with the DSA bill and all the 8 pieces of legislation. Now we're dealing with different ideas, different concepts. It would be appropriate for us to deal with them separately. The most important thing is to have the priority set right. For the DSA, it will not be meaningful until after we have abolished the offsetting arrangement. So we will be presenting the DSA bill to the Council soon enough. Of course, LegCo has the prerogative to decide how to prioritize the bill, but in our opinion, we can separate the two bills. This is our consideration. Mr. Lee Chen-keung. Chairman, thank you. Hong Kong experienced the black riots, and the pandemic is still raging. This current wave is upon us, and the borders remain closed. Many of the businesses are telling me that they are really taking a battering, in particular the tourism sector. Many of the employers are really suffering the situation together with the employees. They keep their staff in jobs. There are some year-end bonuses for some of the sectors. My question for the administration is this. In Paragraph 24, there is a DSA scheme. And if should this go through, there will be a lot of pressure on the cash flow. In 2018, you did have the plan whereby the employer would have to pay 1% of the salary into the DSA per month until such time as they hit 15%. That there is no ceiling at all. If each month one is to make $100,000, then the employer will have to put in $10,000, and this is very much a pressure. Now, the administration said that there will be some simulated calculator for the stakeholders to work out the costs. I hope that you will bring this about as soon as possible so that people would have some ideas. Your publicity is going to make a whole lot of difference. The people have the concept of the abolition of the offsetting arrangement. They don't have the foggiest idea how this is going to be implemented. Also, the admin charge. If you look at the MPF scheme, a lot of the fund goes into the high risk investment, and a lot of the fund is eaten into by the management fees. So will there be any ceiling to be imposed on the management fees? Thank you. Secretary. Chairman, for the first part of the question about the DSA, this is tying in with the MPF, and we have similar arrangement that you talk about $100,000 being earned. If you use $22,500, so 1% would be $300 at the most, if I got my sum correct, and $300 per month, and that's about the maximum. So 1% is more like 5% of the MPF. The money will not go into the employee's pocket. It will go into the DSA. That is 1%. If we are talking about a business with 5 staff members, then we have to deal with the contingent liabilities, and it's likely to happen. And this percentage would pretty much be able to give the guarantee. So this is the contingent liabilities for which provisions would have to be made. Under the accounting rules, this is only a provision on the book, and there is no cash arrangement. In answer to the previous question, I said that it is likely that when SP and LSP liabilities have to be met, then it is likely that the amount will be so huge that the company will go broke, and the implications on the economy will be severe. So we are designing this designated savings account to cater for these contingent liabilities, and the employers will have to make sure that when dismissal takes place, there will be a provision whereby they will be able to cover the situation. The second part of the question has to do with the management of the MPF. I think I can answer this in simple terms. Since its inception, the return is something like 4.2%. And the employers who have to shell out the SP and LSP in addition to the offsetting arrangement are those who are rather conservative. The design of the MPF platform is intended to minimize the administrative charge. And the FSTB has already explained to the Council as to how the management fees can be reduced. Mr. Peter Shiu.
Thank you, Chair. I wish to state that the legislation on MPF was passed. It was made very clear by the administration and to employers that the benefits can be used for offsetting SP and SB, and yet the government has shifting the goalpost in order to provide better retirement protection for employees. That's perfectly okay, but if you add to the burden of employers, then you really have shifted the goalpost. And people like to complain, how come eating out is so expensive in Hong Kong? Why prices are so high in Hong Kong? Well, this is because of both high rental and high labor costs. And of course, the higher costs will be transferred to consumers. This time, you have a new way of working the MPF, and employers will have to pay extra that can contribute to inflation, and the costs will be transferred to consumers. For companies that are not able to do so, then they have no choice but to wind up, in particular, we're in the middle of the fifth outbreak of the pandemic. Many companies cannot survive, and this is just the fourth day of the Lunar New Year. Now, Secretary, if I don't know how many members of the public watching this debate live can understand the whole system. So you want to give employees more? Can the costs be transferred to employers? Can the employers absorb the extra costs? I will have to wait and see. Now, I have received many questions from employers. Now, if an employee has served in a company for 20 years, of course not until his retirement date. Now, if he wants the employer to dismiss him, he will get extra, and if he doesn't do so, he won't. So don't you think that there is moral issue involved? Well, stability, job stability is so important. If an employee deliberately performs in such a manner that he wants the employer to sack him, then he cannot get the LSP. And I think we should have confidence in Hong Kong. By the time the new arrangements are in place, Hong Kong's economy should be better. Now, if a person has worked in a company for 20 years, and if he resigns of his own accord, then he can get his share of LSP and leave. But if he is sacked by his employer, then he will get extra. Will this happen? I hope you understand that if an employer sacks an employee because of the latter's poor performance or negligence, then the employer can just dismiss him, and there is no need to pay any severance pay. But then if an employee used to be very proactive, so in the past he could call 100 customers, but now only 20, 30 a month. And if he used to be very courteous and conscientious, now he is rather lax and impolite, then can the employer has no choice but to sack him for better productivity, and then the employer will have to give him more. Many employers have started to worry about this, and these employers may use to enjoy harmonious relations with the employees. Now, and employees may earn more if they deliberately perform poorly in order to be sacked. So I think there are many moral issues involved, and the Secretary will have to think about them. Yes. Now, because of the offsetting arrangement, if the employer would rather dismiss the employee, and then the SP or LSP benefits would come from the employer's mandatory contribution. With offsetting arrangement, the LP and SP has got an element of employment protection, but because of the offsetting arrangement, that function is no longer there. And with the abolition arrangement, there may be also changes, and there may be some moral hazards. But then, and I think employers will have to be very fair in using his mandatory contributions for SP and LSP entitlements. And I hope that the employees like Ken be more harmonious. It's now my time. I think the abolition arrangement will improve retirement protection and will ensure that employees will have sufficient savings in their MPF accounts. This will plug the loophole we have now. Some say that by improving employees' benefits, we may jack up inflation and add to employers' operating costs. But I think past experience shows that this is not always true. Many members would like to have the new arrangement put in place earlier, and they find the targeted date of 2025 too late. So, Secretary, you said that the government will focus its efforts on developing the eMPF platform. The FSTB and LWB will together focus on developing the eMPF platform. Many members feel that this platform is a way of stalling, but is there any way you can expedite the implementation of the platform? Last year, when we implemented the bill on the eMPF platform, we were rather unhappy with the platform. Hong Kong is a world financial center, and the country has positioned Hong Kong as a world innovation and technology center. So why will you have to wait until 2025 before the eMPF platform is available? Can you urge the MPF authority to work faster, because the legislation is ready? All you have to do is to write the program and develop the platform. Can you ask the authority concerned to work faster so that we can have the abolition system implemented earlier? Secretary, I think we have no choice but to rely on the eMPF platform. Now, before, if we decided on a different option before we started, then so long as you're willing to pay double or triple, you would be able to have a separate system. But we have already decided to use the eMPF platform. We have already spent time and resources on developing the eMPF platform. And all trustees have their own different platforms. Dealing with over 3 million accounts. So it is a very challenging task to develop the eMPF platform. Even if we set up a platform of our own to deal with the abolition arrangement, we'll be facing very similar problems. Because there is the offsetting portion as also the non-offset portion. And then we also have to take into account the calculation of accrued benefits of employers' contributions. So we have already sourced a contractor to develop the platform after tendering. So we can only press ahead with it. Thank you. Now we move on to another agenda item, obligations and rights of employees and employees under the coronavirus disease 2019 epidemic and related support measures provided to employees. We originally scheduled the meeting to 1 p.m., but I believe members will be very enthusiastic in asking questions, so I will extend the meeting by 15 minutes to 1:15 p.m. As we all know, because of the development of the pandemic, we have more and more restriction and testing arrangements, and some people affected will have to use their no-pay leave to deal with their period of absence from work, and some may have been sacked because of that. And so when on the day of chairman election, we decided to convene this special meeting. We invited representatives from the administration and the Equal Opportunities Commission. So from the Labour and Welfare Bureau, we have Dr. Lord Chi Kwong, and we have Mr. Ricky Chi, chairperson of EOC. Regrettably, we don't have anyone from the Food and Health Bureau, and this is most disappointing because many questions are for them to answer, and unfortunately they have sent no one to this meeting. All right, if you'd like to ask questions, please raise the virtual hand. We have quite a few members already, and may I refer you to a few papers. We have got a joint paper from 7 trade unions, and please refer to paper CB249/2021-01, and we've also got a paper from the EOC, paper CB253/2022-01, and from the Labour and Welfare Bureau, paper CB239/2022-03. Secretary, please briefly introduce the paper to us. Thank you. Thank you for giving us this opportunity to share our views with members on this matter. Now we have the 5th outbreak of COVID-19 with us, and there is a high risk of a further explosion of cases. And all along, we appeal to employers and employees to be mutually accommodating. And as we said, it's difficult for employers to employ the right employees, and if the former do not treat this matter carefully and ruin labor relations, then when the economy recovers, it would be very hard for them to re-employ employees. There are employees that are confined to their homes or at quarantine centers for quarantine. And some employees have been sacked by employers as a result. We've already made it very clear that this may constitute a case of unreasonable dismissal. And there have been discussions as to whether absence from work in order to comply with anti-pandemic measures can qualify for sick leave. But then we've considered whether Cap 599 can be used to tackle this problem, but then our conclusion was 599 was related to control of infectious disease and was not really suitable for dealing with labor relations. So, for people who cannot report to duty due to anti-pandemic measures, can that be regarded as sick leave? I think as a matter of policy, that is very clear, but then the legislation has to be sorted out. So we've taken this very seriously. We are studying the relevant matters. Where necessary, we will introduce legislative measures to the Council. Thank you.
Well, time is pretty tight. You're going to have 3 minutes for the question and the answer. Please be strict with the time. I'm going to draw a line after the last speaker. Mr. Chow Shu-chung. Chairman, in interest of time, I'd like to say that for the workers who are subject to quarantine and testing, they are experiencing a lot of difficulties. The Secretary said that he would like to invoke 599A and 599J to deal with the employees who are subject to quarantine and testing, and they should be regarded as taking sick leave. I'm wondering why the FHB is not represented here. Are they so busy that they can't be with us today? Paragraph 4 is sufficiently clear. After the quarantine period, the Department of Health will issue medical certificates upon request. In earlier documents, the government talked about doctor's certificate. Why do you call these medical certificates? Under the law, you have to have a medical practitioner certificates. And also paragraph 5, for those subject to RTD, it doesn't say they can apply for the sickness allowance. And in paragraph 6, the government is appealing to the employers to be considerate and show understanding to the employees. As a representative of the employees, I find that the employees are having a raw deal. That they want to go to work, but they are restricted, and I think the employers should be considerate and show understanding to the government's policy. I think the government seems to be too detached from the situation. I'm urging the employers, myself, to be considerate and to be understanding of the employees' difficulties, that they are innocent people. It is the case that the government are restricting their movement, that they cannot turn up for work. Yes, the COVID situation is pretty serious. And in the near future, the Omicron variant is causing problems to Hong Kong in a pretty serious way. So the FHB is coping very hard with the situation. But I hope that you will understand the difficulties facing the Food and Health Bureau. As to the sick leave, now, for the medical certificate, and the situation is not clear now. If we can amend the legislation to put things beyond doubt, I'm sure that it will obviate a lot of arguments. The doctor can issue a certificate, but would this be regarded as a sick note? And this is not sufficiently clear. We really want to resolve this issue. Of course, the case can be taken to the Labour Tribunal. The best scenario is to have mutual understanding. And I think we have to have the policy clear. Mr. Stephen Ho. Chairman, am I coming through? 恭喜發財 all employers and employees in Hong Kong. I hope that they will be surviving all right during the COVID situation. Mr. Chow Shu-chung referred to the innocence on the part of the workers. I think that the employers and employees are in the same boat. In paragraph 4, you issue them with a medical certificate, and the employees will be entitled to the sickness allowance. Now, this is imposing a heavy burden on the employers. There may be, let's say, the Moon Palace saga, and also the Kwai Chung estate incident. There may be a whole bunch of employees who will be unable to turn up for work. I mean, the business may have a couple of employees, and a lot of them cannot turn up for work. The employees may be able to claim insurance coverage. This is more than 4 days. This is a long leave. For the SMEs, they have finite resources. What sort of support will you be giving them? It's only with sufficient resources would they be able to, like you said in paragraph 8, be considerate to the employees. It's no good for you to say no dismissal and no sacking. I mean, they do need to have the resources. Secretary. Well, from another angle, I think we have to consider the pandemic situation. If a policy is not conducive to the fighting of the pandemic, we have to make some changes. If there are some employees who can become the loophole, then it will not be good enough. So from the policy point of view, we have to consider whether the policies are appropriate, and we also have to have regard to the pandemic situation. Thank you. I cannot hear anything particular in terms of support or financial support for the employers. You have the AEF, and maybe there is something for the catering businesses, but the employees are taken away and ordered into quarantine. Well, sorry, Mr. Ho. Please reflect the views to the administration. We have to move on. Mr. Lam Chun Sing. Chairman, thank you. The Secretary said a moment ago that the legislation amendment would be considered. I'm wondering whether we can do something about the guidelines. In 2003, on 31st of March, the Labour Department issued a set of guidelines in relation to SARS. If the Director of Health were to issue quarantine order to require them to receive checkup on a daily basis, then the DHR will be issuing the sickness certificate. It's not a medical certificate. Is it because of the fact that there are massive lockdowns that the government will be shying away from the obligation? Now, Professor Yuan said that when Yak Kwai House was locked down, the number involved was 2,500, and there are not enough quarantine places, and that's why there is the home quarantine. Would home quarantine be the same as quarantine in quarantine centers? Also, there are many quarantinees who said that they cannot get in touch with the Labor Department, and I think the whole department should be publicizing the hotline for the residents and to be able to seek assistance. Secretary, in 2003, we look at the legislation. Sorry, Secretary. Secretary, sorry. Your mic, something wrong with your mic. Someone is shuffling the paper, and your voice has been drowned out. So will somebody sort out the microphone? Will you please not shuffle the paper so hard? Back in 2003, the understanding was not the same as the understanding today. In 2020, the Labor Department has updated the guidelines on the web. Simply put, as I said in answer to other questions, when a doctor issues a certificate, would that be regarded as sick leave? And that the law doesn't seem to be sufficiently clear, and there is a need for more clarity to avoid arguments. Whether it is homebound quarantine or whether it is a quarantine in a quarantine center, it doesn't make any difference under the law. Under CAP 599, this is an order for quarantine, and the quarantinee will be subject to quarantine either at home or in a quarantine center or in a hospital. And so this doesn't make any difference under the law. Now, we will get on with this as soon as possible, and we will address all the concerns. Mr. Iman Yu. Chairman, thank you. Chairman, my question for the Secretary is this. He said he would need some time to clarify the legal matters. How long is it going to take you? There are so many lockdowns happening on a daily basis. People are really anxious to find out how they will get the protection under the law. The Secretary said, I mentioned the unfair dismissal. Will the Labor Department be taking the initiative to prosecute employers involved in unfair dismissal instead of sending the Deputy Commissioner there? Third, now you said that you're worried about abuse when it comes to allowance given to people involved in the lockdown. Now, for people who are subject to homebound quarantine or quarantine in a quarantine center, there must be a list. I don't think people will be turning up in these quarantine centers or turning up in these homebound quarantine in order to get the allowance. You're reluctant to provide the allowance for those out of work, and reluctant to provide allowance for those who are subject to quarantine. Are you asking them to apply for CSSA?
Secretary, it takes time to amend the legislation. As I said, at first we wanted to use CAP 599. As a regulation, it can be implemented by means of negative vetting. But then a legislative amendment takes time. It has to go through the administration and be passed by the council, but we will work at full steam. We understand that time is tight. We understand that. Regarding the suggestions by Mr. Yip, we will consider them. We analyze the each and every suggestion to us. All supporting measures for people affected, well, whether they can help is one thing. We've also have to consider the possible undesirable effects, or whether they would impact on the effectiveness of the anti-epidemic work. Because if any measure that will adversely affect our anti-epidemic work or will add to the pressure will be counterproductive. Mr. Chu Kwok-kang. Mr. Chu Kwok-kang. Am I coming through? Yes. Thank you, Chair. Secretary, I'd like to ask whether the administration has got statistics on the number of employees sacked as a result of complying to restriction and compulsory testings. I don't believe you have maintained such statistics. Would you consider that in the next round of AEF provide subsidy to micro SMEs, to give them subsidy for giving paid sick leave to employees subject to restriction and compulsory testing orders? Thank you. My simple answer is when the Labor Department receives any complaints on labor disputes, we will maintain these statistics and we will follow up. Given that we are fighting the pandemic, or rather our labor officers help with the overall anti-epidemic work. All 180,000 civil servants are actually coming out to help the anti-epidemic work, even though they should be working from home. And we may not accord top priority to maintaining of statistics, but when we're able to do so, we will do that. And of course, it's best we have 0 such cases. But when there is any request for help, they will be recorded in our statistics. Of course, we want employers and employees to collaborate and be mutually understanding. In our AEF 6.0, we will seriously consider the suggestion you gave us. But then, for a system to be speedy and efficient, then we have to make it simple. And as a result, we may miss out some areas that need help, because to address certain areas, the system to address them may be rather complicated to set up. And in AEF 6.0, we will very carefully see how we can help these people. Mr. Tan Ka-Piu. Thank you, Chair. I think the microphones used by the Labour and Welfare Bureau are very bad. I think next week we're going to have Zoom meetings as well. I hope they can improve the sound reception. I'm very disappointed with the remarks made by the Secretary If it was 2 years ago, you talked about the pandemic being new and you had to study relevant legislation is okay, but then it's been 2 years. Unless we have a sudden medication to cure the disease. If you are still asking employees and employees to be mutually understanding, and on the other hand, you're talking about having a court case, that's the best. But then, do you think employees will so easily seek help from the Labor Department and even lodge a claim against the employer in court? I'm sure most employers and employees are law-abiding and very good citizens. Now you have got a number of cases. You have gone through 2003 SARS outbreak, and I'm sure you have guidelines to tackle these issues. So now, why can't you confirm that with a medical certificate, then you're entitled to paid leave, and then even if you are subject to home quarantine, like the residents of Kwai Fong Estate, then you can also give a medical certificate? Is that because you can't have the consent from the Department of Health? Because you said that some measures might be counterproductive to control of the pandemic. And what about the EOC? Have you encountered any cases? In the year 2000, we felt that by amending the legislation, we might not have enough time to amend the legislation, and then we thought that it would be more appropriate to amend the legislation when that term was over. And so at first we thought that we should not wait for legislative amendment, and then because of uncertainty with the tenure of the council, so we decided against amending the legislation. But now we have a new term of LegCo. We think it is okay for us to amend the legislation. Looking back, if we had done this earlier, of course, that's the best. If we had known that the last term of the council would only end in late 2021, of course, we would have done so. But then in the past few years, you see that there were changes to the tenure of the LegCo. The pandemic started in early 2020. Since then, we have received about 300 requests for help. About 1/10 of them became complaints. Fortunately, in the past few years, we're able to resolve these complaints by means of conciliation. So far, no case has to be settled in court. And since the outbreak of the 5th wave of the pandemic, we have not seen a sudden surge in the number of complaints. We had a low double-digit number of complaints per month, about 20 of them. So, and the ratio is also 1/10 of the total number of calls for assistance. Again, on time management, I hope new members can understand the rules. I exercised the authority of the chairman to extend the meeting by 15 minutes. Now, for sure 15 minutes would not be enough. To further extend the meeting, I need the agreement of all members here. There cannot be any objection from members before I can extend the meeting. So any objection from members? So I don't see any objection because we are all concerned about this issue. So we can extend the meeting. So for those who have raised their virtual hands, you can be assured that your turn will come. Mr. Kwok Wai Keung, I share the concerns of many members. We need actual protection for labor rights. It cannot be by means of guesswork. After the restriction and compulsory order issued with regard to Kwai Chung Estate, the administration said that if employers sack their employees in the interim, that could be a breach of labor legislation. I had the feeling when reading the statement that the administration was actively following up, and now the secretary said today that perhaps they might not have full support from the relevant legislation and amendments may be needed. So at first we thought that protection was certain, but now we come to know that there may need to be legislative amendments. So do our employees really get the protection they need? And then when it comes to unreasonable dismissal, it hinges on point whether a medical certificate is available. The Department of Health is responsible for issuing medical certificate, and yet it's absent today. So what more can we say? We have a submission from a trade union of civil aviation. Some employees have already been sacked. So will the Labor Department still continue to urge the employers to be understanding? We should give something concrete and specific to protect our employees. We should not just pay lip service to employment protection. In the last term of the council, there was a question. And then the Labor and Welfare Bureau provided an answer. And I think the answer tallies with the content of this paper. With medical certificate from the authority, then a certificate can be issued by the Department of Health, but whether it constitutes a medical certificate for paid sick leave, there is some uncertainty. And it is still our view that dismissal by employer during that period is unreasonable dismissal. But as we all know, that this is a rather vague issue. There is nothing in the law to say that second an employee who cannot report duty because of compliance with anti-epidemic measure is a case of unreasonable dismissal. So there is ambiguity or uncertainty in the law. If members would like us to make it more certain in the relevant legislation, that is our subject of study now. Mr. Dennis Leung. Now, there were already 3 blocks blocked in Kwai Chung Estate, and as today, the residents there cannot get any medical certificate. So how will the hospital authority and the Labor Department help these people to get medical certificates? Now, if an employee is injured at work and if he attends an A&E department and he is put in a surveillance ward to see whether there is any aftermath issues, then he will still be entitled to a medical certificate. I don't know why. In this case, members of the public are helping the government to contain the pandemic. They have complied with an order from the government to be subject to restriction and compulsory testings for up to 5 to 7 days. I don't know why the Department of Health cannot issue them with medical certificates to prove that they were under medical surveillance while they were not sick. They were suspected of carrying the virus affecting public health, or whether they were subject to quarantine at home or in a quarantine center in a hospital. They are just in the same situation. I fail to see why the Department of Health cannot give them a medical certificate to help.
In the long term, you're going to go down the legislative path, but for Kwai Chung Estate residents, they are ordered to stop working. I mean, we do have a lot of casual workers or self-employed people who cannot enjoy any benefits or protection under the employment ordinance. Isn't it right for the government to provide them with some quarantine allowance to enable them to comply with the government order and can still survive? Secretary, as I said, the employment ordinance refers to the sickness leave, and when the medical certificate is issued, is this regarded as a proof? And I'm sure it's all a matter of legal interpretation. It would be a good idea for this to be spelled out in the law without having to go to the court. Now, we didn't do so in 2020 because of the legislative matter. Towards the end of the term, there were 40 bills that were still pending. At that time, we didn't expect the pandemic to go on until today, and in this term, there will be no particular problems in dealing with that. So whether it is home quarantine or whether it is 14-day or 21-day in the quarantine center, there will be no difference under Cap 599. Ms. Lillian Kwok. Chairman, thank you. Also about the doctor's sick note, and you're given the medical certificate, but it is not the same as a doctor's sick note. So would there be any protection? Now, because for the education sector, the school cannot hire any substitute teacher. My second question, the SMEs are suffering a great deal if they lose the staff members to quarantine, to the lockdown. Then I'm sure that this is very detrimental to the businesses. I hope that the administration will tell us what sort of support will be made available to these employers. Secretary, as I said in answer to previous question, we'll certainly consider all these points. If we can achieve a particular objective, we need to, in the days to come. I mean, if things are complicated, it would be a bit difficult. There may be ways that can be used to deal with this situation. Mr. Kingsley Wong. Chairman, thank you. Secretary, in terms of sick leave, when the legislation was enacted, there was no consideration of a pandemic. And I think there is a trump card here. The chief executive can use the emergency regulation ordinance. If there is a consensus without any controversy, the pandemic doesn't come around for a century, and I'm sure that we're going to be seeing a lot more compulsory testing and lockdowns, and amending the legislation is something that doesn't produce immediate result. Will something else be done about it? Also, allowance for those who are suspended from work. People are subject to lockdown and quarantine. I think that something ought to be done for those who are subject to lockdown. And if there is any abuse, I'm sure that this can be dealt with under the law. I hope that the Secretary would prioritize the suffering of the people and see how best those who are subject to quarantine and lockdown, they've been suffering for such a long time. If they're out of work, they can't put food on the table. How are you going to alleviate their plight? Secretary, over the past 2 years, it is our daily task to help those who are affected. We try our best to do as much as we can. We'll try and come up with ways that easier enough to help people. You mentioned the emergency regulation ordinance. The chief executive in council is empowered under law to do certain things. In this kind of scenario, like sick leave and suspension from work and dismissal, we may not be able to tackle this. There is a threshold with regard to the legislation, and we have to fulfill all these thresholds. Mr. Kingsley Wong, you still have a bit of time. Mr. Peter Shield. Chairman, thank you. For people living in buildings subject to a lockdown, one day of suspension will not make any particular difference because we'll all understand the situation. But for Kwai Chung Estate, for instance, it is put under lockdown for a whole week. I'm sure that there will be a negative impact, and this is really disruptive to the employers, in particular those MSMEs. The employees are really worried that in absence of any doctor sick note, they are not entitled to the protection. The employers will also think likewise. They don't really want to see the employees taking a pay cut. But if they have to hire an extra hand to substitute those who are absent, they are under tremendous pressure. So, Secretary, for the places that are put under lockdown for 5 days, 7 days, I'm wondering whether you can come up with a package of support. Let's say you pay 4/5 of the salary. Let's say they're making $6,000, we can make up for the shortfall, and that would obviate the need for the employers to hire substitutes, and that will not affect the employees either. Secretary. Well, it's not as simple as you make it out to be. In these lockdown operations, we do have coordination of various departments. Our priority is to minimize cross-infection and also to battle the pandemic. If there are things that involve vetting and authorization, we will consider that, but the overriding priority is to battle the pandemic. And we'll have to make sure that there are no scenarios that will be detrimental to the pandemic work. This issue. You come up with a mechanism and people can make the application. Under the AEF, there were abuses, and if you come up with a plan in respect of lockdowns for an extended, prolonged period of time, that there will be some solutions. Thank you. Now, you may say that I'm considering the abuse. All systems are subject to abuse. It's a matter of degree. But in terms of the pandemic, other than abuse, we'll have to consider whether the change in behaviors would aggravate the anti-pandemic efforts. My turn next, Secretary. As you all understand, during the fifth wave of the pandemic, many people have been subject to home quarantine. They have to serve the quarantine at home, and they have to do the medical surveillance. Now, for these homebound quarantine, the Secretary said that it would not be any different from the quarantine in a quarantine center. That the Secretary said he might amend the legislation. I am happy about that. It's better late than never. But if we don't have the medical practitioner's certificate, it would not be a good idea. Mr. Secretary, why do you change your position? On the 23rd of June last year, I put in a written question in LegCo. I asked the Department of Health regarding the proof to be given to the quarantinees. According to the administration, they've issued 5,000 sickness certificates. These are the sickness certificates. Now, the Secretary is very, very busy. The SFH is very busy because of the pandemic, but I don't think it's good enough for them not to be represented here. The DH is not represented here. We don't have to have the Secretary herself. At least someone should be here to address the question. Last year, we had the sickness certificate. Why not this year? Professor Law, it may not be fair to put this question to you, but do you know why this is the case? Well, have you tried to do a bit of lobbying across the Bureau and ask them to issue a sickness certificate to the quarantinees? Have you done something about it, Mr. Secretary? Chairman, in 2020, regarding the Cap 599, in terms of the quarantine arrangement and medical surveillance and so on, the doctor's certificate is an issue that was considered. The health authorities can issue a doctor's certificate and state the reason why the employees fail to turn up for work. Now, this is a quarantine arrangement. This is not a kind of sickness. Well, last year in the administration's reply, they issued 5,000 sickness certificates. Was it a wrong move? Well, that's the doctor's certificate. It says the sickness certificate, but this is not about a sickness, and there is a bit of ambiguities there, and that's the only certificate, but the certificate doesn't specify an illness. Well, I'm not trying to put you on the spot, Mr. Secretary, because it's not directly related to you. Now you are implementing the labor ordinance, but we are dealing with the sickness certificate. Previously, we did have these kind of certificates. 5,000 or so have been issued. Why can't you issue that same certificate now?
I understand that in the medical certificate there is a section on diagnosis. You don't know what to put there, but you can just put down home quarantine or medical surveillance. Can that be acceptable? Can you just use the same format used last year? Over 5,000 medical certificates in that way have been issued. Why can't you issue more? I have no misunderstanding. The Department of Health will continue to issue such medical certificates because your questions were so explicit. I was also as explicit. Now, the diagnosis there would be for quarantine or for testing, but under the employment ordinance, whether medical certificate will enable an employee to receive paid sick leave, it hinges upon what is put down in the medical certificate, because home quarantine is not a disease or not an illness, and there is some legal ambiguity. So we have to resolve this ambiguity. The Department of Health can continue to issue such medical certificates. If you want a court case to decide whether this medical certificate written in this way can enable an employee to get sick leave, all right, that's so be it. But if so many members would want clarity, we will see. We will sort out the legal ambiguity. We will see whether, regardless of the diagnosis put down in the medical certificate, the employee can still be entitled to sick leave. Then we can avoid arguments. All right. The medical certificate will continue to be issued, but there are legal ambiguities to be resolved. And since members have been so explicit, then we have to clarify this in law. So that's called medical certificate, and it will continue to be issued. So may I bother you to inform the Department of Health or the Labor and Welfare Bureau, so the people who have been confined to their home for testings and restriction, can you please tell these employees where they can get this medical certificate? And since there are disputes, another way out is to provide an allowance for suspension from work. And I think if you have relevant legislation for submission to the Council, I'm sure you'll have it smoothly passed. Now, we of course want the pandemic to ease as soon as possible. Meanwhile, we want to support employees and we want to protect their benefits and interests. The panel will continue to do so. So I want to thank members for your attendance. If we don't have any AOB items, then the meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much. Happy New Year. Thank you.